So the next thing I want to do is start thinking in terms of a jump. Right now I have this basic player controller here. I can move left and right, but I can't get past my chicken right now. There's no damage or anything happening from the chicken. We've got a little glitch here that my character can fall over, and that I'll fix that real quick. So currently in the rigid body, the character can not only jump, it's got a box collider on it, and if it starts to rotate or catches an angle, it'll fall over. So what we can do is just check fixed angle. That'll basically constrain the Z rotation of this object. So at this point, you shouldn't fall over again, but I do want to start to think in terms of a jump. And the jump we'll do, we could do a simple jump that kind of listens just for the space bar and fires off an action, but we'll also check to see if it's on the ground, so we can test, we can keep it from jumping while you're in the air. So in other words, we won't double jump. So what we'll do, I want to do a little bit of cleanup here, and the first thing I want to point out is that currently I have my player character selected, and I have a state machine on here, and it's simply called FSM. And what I want to do is I want to rename this FSM, and I do want to point out that there's an FSM component for every state machine that you attach to an object, and an object can have multiple state machines, and we'll take advantage of this. For every state machine that you attach to an object, they are listed as individual components here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this state machine. This will be my, I'll leave it called FSM or on the front end, or I could wipe it out. It'll be pretty clear that it is in fact a state machine once I get used to figuring out where to look for this information. But I'll call this player, I'll just call it player left. I'll call it player left and right. That's the name of the component, player left and right. So this state machine controls the left-right movement of the player. You can see that here in the component, there's a Playmaker script that's been attached, and now we have a component name of player left and right. That's probably not the best naming convention, using that and the ampersand in there, or the and, but yeah, well, we'll see if that creates any bugs. If something starts acting wonky, I know that I'll go back in and give that a modify that. So I have a state machine now that's handling the left and right, and what I want to do is I want to add another state machine. So in this Playmaker tab, there's a Playmaker drop-down, or an object drop-down menu, and this shows me all of the objects inside the scene that have, or inside this project that have state machines attached to them. So if I want to look at the chicken, remember we did our waypoint system on the chicken, I can just click on this drop-down menu and choose the game object that has a state machine. To the right of that, we have the ability to select state machines that are attached to an object, and we can add an FSM to the object that we have selected. So I now have a new state machine, and I'm going to go to the FSM tab, and I'm going to call this, in the name field, I'm going to call it FSM player jump. Okay, so this state machine is going to do nothing but handle the jump of the player. So now in order to get this started, what I want to do is I want to test to see if the character is on the ground. Maybe I could test against other objects as well, but for this demo right now I'm just going to test for the ground. Or maybe some kind of legal surface to jump off of. So in state 1, I'm going to call state 1, this is going to be I'll call this off the ground. So since my character is starting up in the air, this state will be off the ground, and what I'm looking for is to pass it over to a state that says is on ground or is grounded. Let's call it is on ground. So in the off ground state, what we want to do is we want to constantly be checking to see if this character lands on the ground, and we can do that with a physics 2D, and we can do a collision event, a collision 2D event. So I'll just double click to add that. And so what we're doing is we're checking to see if it, on collision enter, if it collides with an object, and I'm going to select my ground cube, and I'll call this ground or floor. I'll call it floor. And I'm going to go over to my tags. I'm going to choose, there's a ground tag that's already provided. So I'll add that. If I need to add a tag, I can just add tags, and in the current element size that I have here, I could just say, you know, I can make this 12, and now I got a couple more slots to add tags. So you're going to have a number available here, and if you just make that number bigger, you get additional slots. And then you can type in whatever. So now I have a whatever tag. So I'll go back to my player character. There it is. I'm inside the jump state machine, and I'll test to see if we're colliding with an object that is colliding with a tag. Now I'm clicking on the drop down menu, I'm not seeing a list of tags, and that's because it's looking for a variable. And so I'm just going to toggle that button, and now when I click on the drop down menu, I have the ability to choose whatever tag I want. So I'm going to test to see if it collides with something that's tagged with ground. In this case, my cube ground is tagged, and the send event that I want to do, I'm clicking on a drop down menu. I don't have anything here, so I'm going to create an event, and I'll say that has touched ground. So if it's off the ground and it enters a collider that has a tag of ground, we're going to fire off the has touched ground, and I'm going to pass it to the is grounded state. Now we can test this already. If I hit the play button, I'll just pay attention to what's happening in the state machine. It starts off the ground. When I hit the play button, when it hits the ground, it fires off that is grounded state, or is on ground. Now my player's falling very fast, and that's a good thing. I kind of like the snap and the gravity, but if I want to, I could increase the linear drag of the rigid body of my player character. And now when I hit the play button, I just went from 0 to 1. That was still pretty fast. If I bump up the linear drag, let's say to 5, it's going to fall or move through the air much slower. So you can see he's falling pretty slowly. And I could even, let's see, I'll just move him up a little bit, hit the play button, and I'm watching down here. And I see that when he hits the ground, he fires off that event. So I'll toggle the play button, and I'll bump that linear drag down to something a little bit more reasonable, back down to 1. What I'm going to do on the is grounded state is I'm going to test to see when he's off the ground or when he's not on the ground. So I'll do the same thing. I'll do a collision event. I'm going to collide with a tag. So I'm going to switch from a variable to the drop down menu and choose ground. But rather than on collision enter 2D, I'm going to do on exit. So I'll create another event, and instead of has touched the ground, we'll say has left the ground. I'll go back to my state, and so when this on collision exits, so whenever the player exits the ground, a collision object with the ground tag, we'll fire off the has left ground, and we'll add that as a transition, has left ground, and we'll feed that back to is off the ground. So in other words, when it's off the ground, it's in this state. And then when it collides with, when it enters a collision with something that's tagged with the ground, it'll fire over to the is on ground state. And then when we're inside the on ground state, when it exits that collider, the ground collider, it'll fire off a has been grounded. So I'll hit the play button. I can see that I start off on the ground and I land. Right now I am grounded. When I pick up the player character, you can see that it's off the ground. I'll drop it, it's back on the ground, off the ground. I'll drop it, back on the ground. So you can see how that kind of switches states. Now because this is a state machine that we can actually just build in, we have a simple ground test here. Now we could do, set some bools and do some bool testing, and that way we could actually activate a double jump. But right now what I want to do is when I'm off the ground, we can't jump. When I'm on the ground, we can jump. So I'm going to go to the is on ground state, and what I'll do is I'll listen for some input. So I'm going to go to input. I'm going to do get button or get key down. And the key I'm listening for is the spacebar. And the send event, we're going to create a send event and we'll just simply call it jump. So I'll right click and add the jump event as a transition. And in the get key down, if we fire off the space, we want to send to the jump transition or jump event. I'm going to add another state and I'll just wire this jump over here. So what we have is when we're off the ground, it's not listening for the spacebar, so it can't fire to another state. If we're on the ground and we hit the spacebar, it'll fire off to state 1. So I'll tap the spacebar on the way down, nothing will happen. But once I'm on the ground and I tap the spacebar, it fires off to state 1. So this is going to be our jump state, or our jumping state. So we're in the process of jumping when we get in this state. And what we'll do is we'll do a physics 2D, and we'll add force. And I'm going to add force along the y-axis, so the up axis. And I'm not going to add every frame, although later I might come back and modify this, and I'm going to add like a force of 600 along the y. Okay. Now, when I test this, when I hit the space bar, okay, it just it's only applied one time. If I don't want to check the every frame, but if I do hit the every frame and I hit the space bar, you can see my character flies off the screen. So I'm going to go back and make sure that every frame is not checked, which is the default. And so I have a situation that when I hit the space bar, he jumps off the ground. Now, right now I'm stuck, so we're stuck in the jumping state, which is not good, so it's no longer testing to see if we're on the ground or off the ground, but we can fix that really simply by adding a finished transition. So in other words, once it's going to pass through this state, it's going to apply the add force, it's going to be finished, and we'll pass it back to off the ground. So we'll assume that when we're jumping, we've just applied a force, and that force will get us off the ground. When we're off the ground, clearly we're off the ground, so we don't even need to test for it. And so at this point, we have a simple loop where we're on the ground, we hit the spacebar, we jump, and we're off the ground. And so we can test that. So that's a really simple way to kind of control a jump. And because it's in another FSM, I don't have to listen for my, I don't have to parse between the left and right keys. It's just like its own little state machine that does nothing but jump. So we'll continue to push this forward in the next presentation.